Last year when I was doing my NBA mock drafts, I got a lot of comments about how you wanted me to do some prospect scouting reports similar to what I do for the NFL. And I decided this year, even though, of course, like typical Jeff fashion, I waited until pretty much the last minute to get started. I've decided that's what I'm going to do. In terms of the number of prospects I get through, I'll probably at least be able to get through the potential lottery picks. It could be up to 20 players. I'm not going to get to everyone, but I'll try to get to who I can, especially the biggest names, the most notable names, because those are going to be the ones that are important to talk about, the ones that will be important to be on the record about, so we can banty back and forth for years to come about who was right and who was wrong, and at the end of the day, none of it will fucking matter. So anyways, time to start talking about some prospects for the 2016 NBA draft. Almost by nature, I almost said NFL draft, but nonetheless, the NBA draft. Let's talk about the NBA draft, and let's start off with the guy that's been the presumptive #1 pick for the 2016 NBA draft for about 18 months now, and that is Ben Simmons, the kid from Australia who took his talents to LSU in the SEC for his one-and-done season, and now we've reached that moment in time where a lot of people are starting to believe that the Philadelphia 76ers are indeed going to take him with the first overall pick. When you look at Ben Simmons, he's 6'10", 245 pounds. You know, as I watched him more and more, I didn't realize he was as filled out in terms of his frame as he actually was. I thought he was closer to 220 or 225. As you watch him, you see he's a legit 240, 245. The freshman from LSU. You look at his game, and in some ways, he fits kind of the modern mold in certain aspects of what you want out of an NBA front court player, especially on the offensive side of the ball. You look at his size. He's 6'10". He's a legit 240, 245 pounds. This is a guy that could potentially play the 3, although his most natural fit based off of his size and his athletic package is going to be the 4. But either way, he might be a slightly less athletic but bigger 3, or he's kind of a perfect fit as a 4. He could fit either position physically, giving you some potential offensive versatility at the very least. You look at him and you see decent athleticism for the 4. I don't know that he's a great athlete, like an outstanding athlete, but for the power forward position and the position he'll probably play a lot on the floor at the NBA level, even in some small ball lineups, some teams might move him offensively to the 5. He's got enough athleticism to get by, enough athleticism to be able to create off the dribble, get his own shot, and create problems potentially on the offensive side of the ball for opposing teams. Defensively, he's got size and athleticism to be able to guard the 4 as well. What I really like about his game, though, is his skills as kind of that point forward, that lead forward, if you will. Tremendous floor vision and passing ability. I wish more kids at 18, 19, 20 years of age had the type of skill set that Ben Simmons does in terms of the natural feel and instincts as a facilitator on the offensive end. Just tremendous. His vision is great. His abilities to make all the fundamental passes, the spectacular passes, the no-look passes, the outlet passes, probably the best pure ability out of anybody, especially in terms of front court players in this entire draft class. Just outstanding. And then when you combine that floor vision, the ability to create shots for others, with the ability to create his own shot. This is a guy that can be a monster in transition. You get that 240-pound, 6'10" frame going in transition, and he's bringing the ball up. He could be a freight train to contend with, a la a LeBron James. His ability to create off the dribble, like I say, he's not a super explosive athlete, but is probably more than enough athleticism at the 4 at the NBA level to where defenses are going to have real problems, especially if he eventually develops a mid-range jumper, if nothing else, in pick-and-roll situations. He could be deadly with his ability to break down people off the dribble. He's not a phenomenal ball handler, but he, to me, is more than effective enough. Now, we're talking about Ben Simmons and the guy, everybody's been crowning his ass for, like I said, about 18 months now. And as I've watched him and watched him again and watched him again and watched some other prospects in this class, I have to confess, me personally, I just don't fully get it. I don't quite see it. Maybe I'll be wrong. But there are a lot of concerns there, and important, significant concerns for a guy that we're talking about taking #1 overall. First, I look at him at 6'10". I talked about in terms of height and size and bulk, he's got enough to play the 4. I question sometimes his lack of length in terms of his wingspan. He doesn't have above and beyond length and reach. Could that affect him on the offensive and in particular defensive glass at the NBA level? He could have a bit of a problem as a rebounder. He may not. He may be athletic enough to be able to compensate in other ways. But you would like him at 6'10" to have a little bit longer wingspan, a little bit higher standing reach than he actually does. That's not the big concern. In terms of explosiveness, like I said, you watch him and you see him be able to create against 4s and 5s at the college level, but that is the college level. And the fact is that most of those guys, even if they're playing D1 or high D1 level, are not going to make it to the NBA. They're never even going to sniff it. They're never even going to get a cup of coffee, let alone actually put together a productive or functional NBA career. And when I watch him, I'm like, he's not really blowing by people that are far inferior to him in theory in terms of their athleticism, their lateral quickness and foot speed. I wonder just how effective he's going to be on the dribble drive sometimes at the NBA level, because I don't think he's an incredibly explosive athlete. He probably has enough to get by. Same thing with length. He has enough to get by. But they are questions. They're not the most serious or pressing questions, though. The most serious and pressing questions to me are threefold. #1 is perimeter shooting, or in this case, his clear and utter lack of perimeter shooting. At LSU, based off of the offense that they ran, the system that he was in, the lead dog position that he was in, he didn't necessarily have to shoot a lot from the outside, but he's not particularly effective at it either. And when you're talking about a guy that you're looking at as a 6'10" point forward type of guy, you want him to be that stretch type of 4, because he doesn't have a tremendous post-up game. He has some post-up game, but let's be honest, when you watch his post-up game, it's very herky-jerky, and there's a lot of off-balance and, frankly, lucky crap that he throws up that happens to work. I'm really concerned about that lack of perimeter shooting. Now, with that said, guys can come into the league and not be great shooters from the outside. See Michael Jordan, see LeBron James. They can get better. They can improve. It can become at least somewhat of a weapon for them on the offensive end that makes them that much harder to guard and defend on a consistent basis. But right now, when you're talking about taking a guy in the position you're potentially envisioning him at the NBA level, especially for a team like the Philadelphia 76ers with all the bigs they already have, do you need another guy that can't space the floor? And that's my concern, is you talk about that lack of outstanding, like, elite level athleticism and explosiveness, and combine that with the fact that he can't shoot. A lot of teams can run zone on him. They can back off on him. They can stand down from him and force him to take that shot, and it'll take away from some of the other things he should be able to do. He's got to get better at that shot, at least the mid-range jump shot, especially in pick-and-roll situations, because otherwise he's going to hurt his team offensively regardless of what he could do as a passer in terms of in a point-forward type of role. There are bigger concerns even to me than just the perimeter shooting, because that's a skill set. That's something that work ethic and practice and technique work, they can improve that. But when I look at his defensive effort, I feel like it's very lacking. I don't feel a lot of times when I watch Ben Simmons, he wants to put in the necessary work to truly be a great player. And that, to me, manifests itself on the defensive end. I think his effort is very poor guarding on the perimeter. I think sometimes his effort is very poor guarding down low as well. It's just a guy that you want to try harder and you think should try harder than he actually does. And that comes kind of into the most important and pressing thing of all to me in terms of concerns for Ben Simmons, and that's his mentality. And it's about his heart, his killer instinct, his desire, or potentially all of that. This is a kid that came in with all this talk about being the #1 overall pick, frankly went to a shitty LSU program in a second-rate basketball conference in the SEC in 2015, 2016, and only kind of sort of dominated. He should have been more than what he was. He should have done more than what he did. And it leads me to be concerned about whether or not this guy truly has the want to, truly has the desire to, has the ambition or the drive to put in that work, to put in that effort, and more importantly on the court, to stand tall and be that alpha dog, to be that guy. It's a concern I've had about LeBron James throughout his career. And moments and flashes, he could be as much of an alpha dog as anybody in NBA history. The problem is that desire comes and goes, and those moments in time are too far and fleeting. People will bring up the Eastern Conference Finals years back against Detroit. They'll bring up like Game 5 of the NBA Finals this year. They'll bring up other specific examples, but they're too few and far between. And there's all these examples of where he's filling the stat sheet like Ben Simmons did in a lot of ways at LSU. He filled the stat sheet like a Kevin Garnett, but lacked that killer instinct and that hunger to be the alpha dog and to take over and truly impose his will and dominate. And sometimes when his team needs 20, he gives them 20. When his team needs 25, he gives them 20. When his team needs him 30 or 35 from him, he gives them 20 or 15, but he's getting boards and assists. It looks great in theory, but when you're actually watching, it really isn't. And when I watch Ben Simmons, there's just something about him that rubs me wrong in terms of whether or not he truly wants to be a great player. I think he wants the attention that comes from being a great player. I think he wants the endorsements that come with being a superstar. I think he wants to be treated like a superstar. I don't know that Ben Simmons wants to work to be a superstar, and I don't know if he truly wants to play as a superstar. And again, when you're talking about taking a kid potentially #1 overall, that's the last thing you want to be questioning. And that, to me, is the biggest of all questions about Ben Simmons. It's about his mentality, it's about his killer instinct, it's about his heart, or potentially his lack of all of those and his lack of desire to want to be the true alpha dog. In terms of an NBA comparison, I think of somebody like a Lamar Odom going back to his days under Jim Herrick at Rhode Island. I think of a guy where the physical talent is obvious. You can see it. 6'10", 6'11 guys that can handle the ball, tremendous floor vision. They're great passers. They can do a lot of things. You can do so many different things potentially with them on the offensive side of the ball. I thought Lamar Odom was a little more skilled at Rhode Island, a little bit better of a perimeter shooter than Ben Simmons, but very similar in terms of the physical package and what they bring to the table. But as was the case with Lamar Odom for so many years, it was always about, to me, that lack of desire to become the great player that he should have been. It was that lack of heart, that lack of killer instinct, that lack of desire to be the man. He wanted to be a guy. He wanted to be treated like the guy, but he was happy and content with being a guy. Similar to like a Rasheed Wallace. Guys with tremendous talent that would give you those flashes. But at the end of the day, when you look back at their career, you sit there and say, that was a good player, but they should have been a great player. And frankly, they wasted their talents because they could have been so much damn more. And when I watch Ben Simmons, that's what I see. I see a guy that could potentially always be that physical tease that some people that don't really pay attention, they look at the box score, think a guy is a superstar, when the fact is when you actually watch the game, he's just another guy. He's a very good other guy, but he's not the guy. He's not a franchise piece. He's not a guy you can never build a championship contending team around. And when you're in a position to take a guy at #1 overall, that's the type of mentality and mindset you want out of a guy. And when I look at him, I see Lamar Odom. I don't see Kevin Durant. I don't see LeBron James. I don't see Carmelo Anthony. Now, granted, Durant and Anthony have not won NBA championships. Correct. But you can see at points in time in their career where they were clearly alpha dogs. Durant is still the alpha dog. Anthony, for years, has been the alpha dog in Denver and New York. LeBron James has been the alpha dog pretty much wherever he's went. And to me, when you talk about presumptive #1 talents and #1 picks, sometimes you just know when you see them. Like, I think a lot of people knew as early as his junior year of high school that LeBron James was going to be a future NBA Hall of Famer, going years back. When Kobe was playing at Lower Merion as a senior, you knew this guy was going to be a Hall of Famer. I saw Carmelo Anthony. I'm like, someday he will be a Hall of Fame talent. I saw Kevin Durant. I saw greatness at Texas, even in that 1 year. That, to me, is what Ben Simmons should have been at LSU, but he wasn't. He wasn't Kevin Durant. He wasn't Chris Paul at Wake Forest. He wasn't a John Wall at Kentucky, and Anthony Davis at Kentucky. These type of guys that you see and you just know they've got superstar written all over them. I'm sorry. I just don't see that out of Ben Simmons. So while he's been the presumptive pick for 18 months, a year and a half, The bottom line to me is can you really afford to take a guy that has the potential to just be a pretty good role player at the NBA level? Do you really look at Ben Simmons and really truly see a future superstar? Or is it just you're buying into the media hype that's telling you that he's a future superstar? When you really watch him, does he have that intangible it factor? When you see him, you watch him, you know he's special. I just don't see it. To me, he's going to be like a Lamar Odom, a guy you can win a championship with, but as your third or fourth option, and preferably as your sixth man coming off of the bench. Is that the type of guy that you want to take number 1 overall? To me, he's a physical tease. When you talk about the lack of perimeter shooting and how far he has to go on that, he can get there. But then when you look at the lack of defensive effort and you look at the lack of real desire and killer instinct and kind of how he conducted and carried himself at LSU in his one season he was there, I mean, it just really should make you step back and pause and say, whoa. Are we putting the cart before the horse when it comes to this guy? Are we getting way too far ahead of ourselves? To me, I think there are better and more appealing options at the very, very top of this draft. Ben Simmons might be somewhere in terms of my overall final big board ranked between 4 to 7. But frankly, I'm just saying, when I watch everybody in this draft class, I think people are nuts, absolutely nuts, when they say Ben Simmons is the number 1 player in this draft class, based off of the reality of who he is right now, what he's been, and compared to other players and what they are and what they have been. I think this number 1 pick talk is absolutely insane. And I think if the Philadelphia 76ers want to take him at number 1, they're absolutely fucking nuts. Fucking nuts. But it's probably going to happen, and only time will tell whether I'm right or frankly they're right.